Let's bring in our analysis. We are now joined by Thembisa Fakude, who is a Senior Research Fellow and Director at Africa-Asia Dialogues, as we continue to analyze this particular attack. Thank you so much for your time, Mr. Fakude. Just looking at some of the information that we are, getting at the moment, of course, 11 people have been arrested. ISIS or ISIL now saying, that it is responsible for this attack. Just talk to us firstly, let's get your reaction firstly, but also an understanding about this particular group, ISIL, of course, the hardline group that once sought control over Iraq and Syria.
Yeah, well, the grouping that is claimed its responsibility is called ISIL-K or ISIL-Khorasan. And they're looking at a state in the province of Khorasan, which is Afghanistan. So this is an old region which comprised of part of Iran, part of Pakistan, and part of Afghanistan. So they're looking at resuscitating that region. So the history of ISIL is very specific compared to Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda wants a new global to change the current global order, whereas ISIL is specific in its demand. For example, ISIL, which is Islamic State in Iraq, and Levant, including all the what's known in Arabic as Shams countries, including Syria, Jordan, and Palestine. So it's very clear on what it wants. ISIL-Khorasan also very clear on what it wants. So what makes me a bit confused is why are they going to attack in Russia? Because Russia is not part of what they want. What they want is a state in the Khorasan region. So it raises some kind of concern on why did they go to Russia. But there's also another school of thought in this regard that, we already hear, for example, some Russian senior officials, including President Vladimir Putin, insisting or insinuating that the attackers might have been sponsored by Ukraine and they came from Ukraine. So given that background of what is ISIL-K and what Vladimir Putin is saying, this could just be a pretext again of going full force into Ukraine, as we saw last time in Chechnya when some apartment blocks were bombed in Russia, and soon after that, Vladimir Putin and his government accused the Chechen rebels of having attacked Russia. And what happened, we all know what happened after that to Chechnya. Chechnya was basically shot, bombed, and burned into the ground. One hopes, of course, that's not going to be the case this time around. And just on that point, in terms of, who is behind this attack, just painting us that picture in terms of how unusual this is. Just, a few days after the election with President Putin being re-elected, any sense that this also, as we look at the motive behind these attacks, could have something to do with that? Well, it has got something to do with it as far as at least where I sit. Currently, President Vladimir Putin is riding on a very high wave, being one of the popular politicians in Russia. He managed to garner over 87% of the votes. So he's very popular. Whatever he does at the moment or decides to do will indeed be supported by the Russian people. Again, I think we have to look at all angles here. When you have senior leadership in Russia insisting that these guys came, or the attackers came from Ukraine, it shouldn't be, we can't rule out the possibility of Russia going full force into Ukraine and attacking Ukraine because it believes that these attackers came from Ukraine. Notwithstanding, of course, that the Americans have warned about a possible attack in the past, but that doesn't mean anything. They might have had a different intelligence in terms of what Russians were or are intending to do in Ukraine. So we'll have to wait and see what's going to happen. But again, I still cannot understand, put together rationale why ISIL-K will, leap all the countries between them and Russia to go specifically to Russia and attack Russia at this point.
And Following this arrest, the FSB security service chief broke down some of those that were detained, 4 of them being identified as terrorists. But also what was found was, passports that belonged to Tajikistan, were found in the car, one of the car, of course, where, some of these suspects were arrested, 11 all in all. Another, of course, to your point in terms of getting to the source of these attacks, the Defense Committee chief of Russia's lower house of parliament saying that, again, Ukraine and its patrons are the main stakeholders here. So knowing what we know, of course, in as far as the Russia-Ukraine war is concerned, what are we likely to see then in the next couple of days?
Well, for me, I think, notwithstanding what your correspondent said in terms of the ongoing investigation, but I think the case was just too swift for me to have been cracked. Often in such instances takes at least a couple of hours. I mean, we are less than 24 hours. Many other issues have already been concluded in terms of who did this and why they did it, and they've managed to arrest all of them, at least according to reports. That for me raises some sort of concerns. And I think the fact that Vladimir Putin, at least a couple of hours ago, when I was doing my research, has not responded in terms of the way forward in this, again, raises some kind of concern on what could be the next step for Russia, particularly when it comes to Ukraine. We know that Vladimir Putin, having been emboldened by the elections, is also looking at moving quite swiftly before the elections in the United States. So I think we all have to be wary of what might just happen after this attack. Knowing, again, Vladimir Putin, I don't think is going to take this lying down. He's likely to react. There is likely to be a very serious and harsh reaction to whoever it is that was involved in this attack. And for me, the low-hanging in this instance will be Ukraine. You are likely to have different statements coming from the Kremlin emphasizing or confirming their suspicion that it might have been Ukraine that has sponsored this attack. And if that does happen, of course, you are unlikely to have any Russians going against this, but you are likely to have them supporting Vladimir Putin in whatever action he might decide to take.
And you might be right, given, just the scale of this attack and what we heard from our correspondent Dasha in terms of how unified Russians are at this point in time. But just looking at the reaction globally from world leaders, I mean, we've heard from the United Nations Secretary General, France, Spain, Italy. We also heard, of course, from South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa, who said that he will be in conversation with Vladimir Putin not too long from now. But how do you think the world is faring, given that the last attack of a bigger scale in Russia was in 2004? How do you think the world is doing in as far as terrorism is concerned?
Well, there are two types of terrorism. There's terrorism of people who are really oppressed within their countries, as some notable politicians stated in the past that one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. So that's one form of terrorism in inverted commas. As you see what's happening, as we continue to see what's happening in Palestine, on war on Gaza, where Israel is targeting everybody else as terrorists. So that's the first point. But there's also state-sponsored terrorism, and we've seen this happen all the time. What happened in Chechnya, for example, should come into our mind at this point, where the Chechens, so-called terrorists, were blamed for attacks in Russia, which led to thousands of people killed in Chechnya and millions of people displaced. Till today, those people are still trying to recover. And there are reports, substantiated reports, that was the doing of Vladimir Putin in terms of trying to introduce himself to the public as a strong figure after the death of Boris Yeltsin. So we have to be open to those kind of possibilities, that there could be some other third-party involvement in this, which is trying to trigger a certain reaction from Russia against Ukraine. But at the same time, you can't write off that this could just be the actions of ISIL-K, who I will argue have not done this before, because, as I've said, what they want is quite clear. Why are they now extending their mandate to Russia? We don't know. Maybe there is a new pact between themselves that we don't know, that there will be ISIL-K plus including other territories in Russia.